Good morning. Welcome to today's service. We're so glad that you joined us. One announcement again, the August virtual FUN fundraising events have all been postponed to September due to technical issues in getting them published on our website. Now I'll state the 5 principles of unity. God is good and present in all things. The holiness of God is my own true nature. I am creating my experiences by how I think. My thinking is guided by my daily affirmative prayers and affirmative actions. I follow and am sustained by these values in every way, every day. And the daily word for today is protected. I shine my light and feel protected. Feelings of fear that creep into my life may conjure childhood memories of scary nighttime images and noises. As a child, I may have felt afraid of the dark or startled by unfamiliar sound. But the morning sun always dispelled the darkness, and I realized there was never anything to fear. I keep that knowledge alive as I let the divine presence within dissolve the darkness of fear and shine the light of comfort and safety. Now, when any darkness descends in my life, I remember the protecting love, presence, and power of God expressing as me. As I attune more fully to my divine nature, light dawns within my consciousness, and I realize that God's protection is always mine. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27:1. And we are very blessed to have our own Jonathan Hall as our guest speaker today.
Good morning. I'm Jonathan Hall, and I'm going to speak to you today about May You Live in Interesting Times. But before we begin, I'd like to do something with the congregation called attunement. Attunement is something that they do in spiritual communities to connect to ourselves and each other and the world before we begin any activity. So let us just take a moment to take a breath. And let us just come down into our hearts, attuning to our hearts, and come down and feel grounded. And then let us experiment with attuning with each other. So I want to feel my heart going out to the congregation and touching each and every one of you. And we are one and connected. And then from that position, we're unity and we're expanding that connection, that attunement out to all of the congregation and beyond the congregation into the world. Okay, peace. Thank you. So I want to talk again about the Chinese have a saying, may you live in interesting times. And what they mean by interesting times is that interesting times have an element of chaos and unrest, and also an element of opportunity and possibility. So we can certainly see in the days that we live with these are These are interesting times. There's certainly a lot of unrest politically, economically, socially, health-wise. So we live in a lot of chaos and unrest, but where is the opportunity? What should we be doing about this? So I thought for today it would be very interesting to, as Unity people, to go back in time to the Fillmores. And they lived in very interesting times. And how did they handle what they were going through? What did they actually do to find the opportunity in their lives? So let's begin by just Henry Fillmore is Charles's father. He's a trapper. He's a fur trader. And he goes 4 miles away from the town that he's living in and builds a log cabin on the Chippewa Indian Reservation. He marries an 18-year-old girl who's a pioneer girl, and they have 2 children. So by 1854, which is like 6 years before the Civil War, he's in this cabin, and he decides, well, this is too difficult for me. I'm going to build another log cabin 10 miles away and live by myself in that log cabin, and I'll leave Mary Fillmore and her 2 children by themselves. So interesting times. So I want to just read something. Now, Mary's alone in the log cabin with Charles, 2 years old. Peaceful relations, however, were never to be taken for granted, and misunderstanding was commonplace between the Indians and the settlers. When Charles was less than 2 years old and he and his mother were alone in their cabin, a band of painted Sioux Indians rushed up. The leader, a towering medicine man, fantastically painted and decked out in full regalia of his profession, strode into the cabin, tore little Charles out of his mother's arms, and rode away with him. Interesting times. It was several days before the warriors brought him back to his distraught mother. Where they had taken him, what they had done with him, Charles could never remember, but he always had a feeling that they had used him in some sort of mystical ceremony. Now, I can't imagine what Mary Fillmore is going through, having her child torn away from her and rode off with a band of Indians. But we all go through our own periods of chaos. So anyway, Charles he grows up. What is it like to grow up on an Indian reservation in the 1850s? Charles has a magical life in that there's no church. The school is a log cabin that only meets 3 months out of the year. And he's basically hunts, small game, fishes, collects berries and rice to eat. And he's sort of like a Huck Finn type of kid, very free and very able to just be with nature, which is very good. Now he has a younger brother. When he's 7 years old, his father leaves. When he's 12 years old, his brother runs away. And by 13, Charles is alone with his mother, surviving. Now, the main thing that happened to Charles Fillmore, that a real turning point in his life, is that at the age of 13, Charles had a skating accident. He dislocates his hip, and because nobody knows how to relocate a hip, it becomes infected. And the way they deal with the infection is that they apply leeches, that doesn't work. They lance it, that doesn't work. So it becomes very, very infected, and Charles becomes bedridden, almost dies, and his leg withers and doesn't grow. So for 2 years, Charles laid in bed, very ill, in pain, with this dislocated hip that was infected. By the 15, his mother said, "Charles, you gotta get up." Mary Fillmore was a very, very strong pioneer woman. A lot of energy, enthusiasm, life to her, and she really told her son, "Listen, you gotta live." So Charles pulled together the strength, got together, put a metal brace on his withered leg that wasn't as long now as the other leg, and made homemade crutches and was limping around, started to limp around. So he grew stronger and stronger, and after a year, now he's 16 years old, what to do? So Charles moves back 4 miles into the town to get a job because they don't have very much money, and Charles is going to get a job and help support his mother. So he moves into town, befriends a young fellow named Edgar, and Edgar's mother, 16 years old, Edgar's mother happens to be a very well-educated woman who is tutoring Edgar. So now Charles hasn't had much education. He hasn't gone to very much school. But at the age of 16, he's tutored by this woman, Caroline Taylor, and studies Shakespeare, Tennyson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he starts discussing all of these ideas, these new ideas that are coming out of New England about transcendentalism and the new thought about religion. So this is his exposure to education at the age of 16. So he stays in the town for St. Cloud, Missouri, for about 3 years until he's 19. And at 19, he decides to visit a cousin of his in Denison, Texas. So he leaves St. Cloud, Missouri, goes to Denison, Texas, and gets a job as a railroad clerk. Now, while he's in Denison, Texas, there's a small group of young people who are very intellectually oriented. They read poetry at night. They discuss new ideas and everything. And he joins this group of people, young people who are exploring new ideas. And that's where he met Myrtle. Now, excuse me. Myrtle Page was born in 1845. She's born to a very wealthy, very influential family. She's one of 9 children, and she's very, very well educated. She grows up in the Episcopal Methodist Church, and she even goes to college. She goes to Oberlin College. But she's very sick. She's very frail. She has tuberculosis from a very young age, and she isn't very robust or athletic or involved physically. But she's very more into books and learning and reading. So she becomes a teacher, 22 years old, graduates. I had a kick out of this. She went the literary course for ladies. She majored in the literary course for ladies at Oberlin College and became a teacher at 22. But by the end of, and taught for a few years, but being very sick and very frail, she decided to go to a warmer climate, a drier climate, Denison, Texas, and she travels to Texas and she joins this group. So this is where Charles and Myrtle met. He's 22, she's 31, and they've really bonded together over the new ideas and their interest in religion, spirituality, and what was going on. Charles and Myrtle spent 3 years together in Denison, Texas, getting to know each other, having a relationship, participating in this group. And after 3 years, Myrtle decided that she wanted to go back to Ohio to teach. So Myrtle went back to Ohio, and Charles decided, well, he'll go on to Colorado. Now, going to Colorado for Charles, now remember, he has this steel contraption on his leg. He gets a job as a mule train driver. Now, a mule train driver is 6 mules and a wagon filled with supplies going over the mountains from one town to the next. So Charles, God bless him, is the mule train driver going from one town to the next. The weather was very inclement. It's raining, it's snowing. He has to sleep. He's doing this by himself. He's underneath the wagon to sleep at night. And one time, it's so perilous, the wagon and the 6 mules go right over the cliff. And Charles leaps from the wagon and saves himself. So, you know, you talk about interesting times and chaos, but I'm so amazed at who Charles was. You know, I've been a member of Unity for 40 years, and I always see these pictures of the Fillmores, like when they're 80s, and these old people, and it's very nice, but these are rugged pioneer people. These are very strong, determined, focused. Both of them are very focused people. So anyway, they finally do get together, and they do get married. 1881, both Charles and he travels back to Ohio, marries Myrtle, and what do? They get on a stagecoach and they start going back to Colorado. This is their honeymoon. Now, there's a story that Myrtle tells that the stagecoach has 11 men and Myrtle. And it's so perilous that they have to put skis on the stagecoach in order to get over the hills, and the men can't stay in the stagecoach. The men are walking behind the stagecoach, and Myrtle is in the stagecoach as they're sliding over the mountains. And they all agreed that she was a very strong, self-centered woman, and she was very pleased to know that she was considered to be very strong by all of the men that were walking behind the stagecoach. So anyway, life in Colorado is difficult for Myrtle and Charles because Charles is always scrambling. He's always trying to find how to make money to support his wife and his 2 children. So he's selling insurance, he's selling real estate, and he buys into a partnership in a silver mine. So I want to just read to you a quote from, now here's the silver mine. This is the Fillmores. They're living in a tent for 3 months up in the mountains looking for silver. And you got to get a picture of Myrtle, because, you know, she's like 40 years old. She's got 2 kids. She's got tuberculosis and malaria. She's living in a tent. And her husband is searching for silver. Now, a period of depression now settles into the affairs of the Fillmores. The failure of the silver mine, they never found silver, was followed shortly by the collapse of the real estate boom, and Charles and his family were left with no financial resources of all and were actually in debt. In the meantime, Myrtle underwent a spell of severe sickness. From her earliest childhood, she had been taught to think of herself as an invalid. In her early years, tuberculosis had been brought up to fear had developed in her. And in Clinton, she had contracted malaria. When the family was having its hardest financial struggle, the tuberculosis and the malaria returned more virulently than ever. So this is what she is faced with. And at this time, she goes to a meeting of Christian Science with E.B. Weeks, and here's what he has to say about the power of positive thinking and curing yourself. And she realized, and this is her quote, she said, I am a child of God, and therefore I did not inherit sickness. Now, we're studying a book by Joe Dispenza called Becoming Supernatural. And in that book, he says, what if the worst thing that ever happened to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you? And what if the challenges you face are actually opportunities to dig deeper, rise higher, and go further to overcome them? And that's exactly what Myrtle did. Now, we're talking about interesting times and chaos, but we're also talking about opportunity and how you handle chaos and with opportunity. So I'd like to read to you Myrtle in her own words, how she cured herself. It was not enough for Myrtle to believe in and accept her own healing. She wanted to share it with Charles and with the rest of her family and with her friends. Finally, she shared it with the world in an article which she wrote entitled How I Found Health. Since its first publication in Unity magazine, this article has never been out of print, and countless thousands have read it and been inspired by it. So again, this is Myrtle Fillmore and how she approached her own healing. I've made what seems to me a wonderful discovery. I was fearfully sick. I had all the ills of mind and body that I could bear. Medicine and doctors ceased to give me relief, and I was in despair when I found practical Christianity. I took it up, and I was healed. I did most of the healing myself because I wanted to understand for future use, and this is how I did it. I was thinking about life. Life is everywhere. Life is in worms and in man. Then why does not the life in a worm make a body like a man's? I asked. Then I thought, the worm has not as much sense as a man. Intelligence is, as well as life, is what is needed to make a body. And here is the key to my discovery. Life has to be guided by intelligence in creating all forms. The same law works in my own body. Life is simply a form of energy and has to be guided and directed in man's own body by his intelligence. And how do we communicate intelligence? By thinking and speaking, of course. And then in a flash, it flashed upon me that I might talk to the life in every part of my body and have it do just what I wanted it to do. I began to teach my body and got marvelous results. I told the life in my liver that it was not torpid or inert, but full of vigor and energy. I told the life in my stomach that it was not weak and ineffective, but energetic, strong, and intelligent. I told the life in my abdomen that it was no longer infested with ignorant ideas of disease, but put there by myself and my doctors, but that it was now a thrill with sweet, pure, wholesome energy of God. I told my limbs that they were active and strong. I told my eyes that they were expressing the sight of the Spirit and were young, clear, bright, because the light of God shone through them. I told my heart that the pure love of Jesus Christ flowed in and out and through its beating, and all the world felt its joyful pulsations. I went to all the life centers in my body and spoke words of truth and encouragement to them, words of strength and power. I asked for their forgiveness for my foolish, ignorant words that I had been telling them in the past, when I had condemned them and called them weak and inefficient and diseased. I did not become discouraged at their being slow to wake up, but kept right on, both silently and aloud, declaring the words of truth until my organs responded. I told my organs that the energy flowing through them was now free and unlimited. And I told them that they were no longer in bondage to my carnal mind or misguided thoughts. They were now centers of life, energy, and omnipresent spirit. Then I asked the Father to forgive me for taking his life into my body and using it so meanly. I promised him that I would never, never again retard the free flow of spirit through my mind and my body by any false words or beliefs, that I would always bless and support them with true words and thoughts of love and encouragement. I would use all of my diligence and wisdom in telling my body just what I wanted it to do in building my physical temple. I also saw that I was using the life of the Father in thinking thoughts and speaking words, and I became very, very watchful of what I thought and said. I did not allow any worried or anxious thoughts into my mind. I stopped speaking frivolously, petulantly, angry words. I let a little prayer up every hour that Jesus Christ would be with me, help me to think and speak only kind, loving words of truth. And I'm sure he is with me now, because I am so peaceful and happy these days. And I want everybody to know about this beautiful discovery that I made and use, because it's not new, but when you use it, receive the benefits of health and harmony, it will seem anew to you, and you will feel that something fresh and alive has awoken in you. That's Myrtle. Now in 1888, when Myrtle had become healed, now Charles became very interested in Myrtle's healing. And Charles decided to begin meditating himself. And I want to read you his words. Night after night, into the early morning hours, I would send word down into the cells of my body to quicken and regenerate them to eternal life. My hip eventually healed and grew stronger. Now, believe it or not, my leg lengthened until in a few years I dispensed with the steel extension I had worn since I was a child and could walk freely again without pain for the first time in many years. This is Charles. Now, I want to talk about a book. My favorite latest book called Grit, Angela Duckworth. And she says, what is grit? Grit is when you have so much determination and perseverance that you cause something to happen. Now, in order to have grit, it takes talent, but it takes effort to create skill. And once you have skill, it takes effort with skill to create an achievement, a result. And an example that she gave in the book, Grit, is that she interviewed a young man who won the gold medal swimming in the Olympics. And he said, you know, it took me 8 years to swim the equivalent of back and forth across the United States twice to win a 2-minute race. So here you have Charles Fillmore and you have Myrtle Fillmore, night after night into the early morning hours, talking to the cells of their body and making something happen. Now this is, so the whole talk here is on living in interesting times. So back to the future, here we are. We're living in interesting times, and we can look to the Fillmores as an example of people who turned their interesting times into possibility and caused something to happen. Now, we don't have to be the Dalai Lama who gets up at 3 in the morning and meditates for 5 hours before breakfast. But I want to suggest that we revive silent unity. Silent unity began 1890, 2 years after Myrtle healed herself. And silent unity was every night the Fillmores would come together with family and friends, neighbors, and meditate for 15, 20 minutes with purpose and determination and focus on healing. And let me tell you what she wrote. Silent unity is open to everyone. Your bodily presence is not necessary to be in spiritual harmony with our group, which means we can do it from our own home. If you are sick, troubled, or unhappy for any reason whatsoever, let us sit in silence with each other for a short period of time every evening and set aside all of our external cares, worries, and concerns, and give ourselves up to spirit within and feel the presence of God and pray for each other. Now, I want to suggest the possibility, as people of unity, that we are, even though we're in our separate homes and we're going through difficult times and there's a lot of chaos in the world, this is the time to come together. This is the time that we in particular have the opportunity to come together in spirit every evening, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whichever we feel. I sit down at 10 o'clock every night. I sit down, I read the daily word, and I pray for the world, because the world really needs attention. But I want to suggest that and anybody who's interested can get in touch with the Unity, and let us start to come together with purpose, with grit, and make a difference in our own personal lives, in the life of the church, and the world. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate being with you. And let's go forward and make a difference. Namaste.
And now it's time for us to state our prosperity affirmation. And before I do this, I want to give a big thank you to all who support Unity Bellingham. And if you wish to send a love offering, information on how to donate is at the end of this video. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. And our prayer of protection. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. I am the light of God. I am the love of God. I am the power of God. I am the presence of God. Wherever I am, God is, and all is well. I am.